Hello and welcome to tonight's live stream. I'm Les from Digital Creations, producing tonight's show for Paul Sinclair's Truth Proof live stream. So I've got to welcome everybody into tonight's chat, and I can see, looking at the chat, we've got quite a few of you in tonight. I'll just do a few name call-outs here, and just to bring you into the show. We've got Space Cow, Corey, Andy Ramsden. Welcome to the show, Andy. Steph J, Jason Taylor, Mysteries and Monsters, nicknames in the chat tonight. And I've got to remind you that our fantastic moderator, Skyflower, she'll be doing a good job for us tonight, I'm sure, and she'll be forwarding any questions. And I've got to remind you, any questions for our guests tonight, can you please put them in caps so we can obviously see them to stand out better than the rest of the comments. So we've got Andy Ghost Whisperer, Stargazer Eternal, Dean Loveland. Now, Dean, you're saying you're newcomers to the show, so it's a special welcome to you to tonight's show. Hope you enjoy what's going to come tonight. We've got Lorraine Groves. She's in Mally Dodgson. Welcome to the show, Mally. Cats D66, Brookers. Everybody's welcome. So that's everybody from the UK and around the world. At this moment, we'll play the intro. And welcome back, everybody. Without further ado, then, it just remains for me to introduce Paul, to introduce tonight's guest. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you, Les. And as always, it soon comes round, doesn't it? And before we introduce our guest, I'd just like to say that I hope the lady who should have been speaking to us tonight, Maria Wheatley, is feeling better a little bit in the near future, and we can get her on. And yeah, she would have been a fabulous guest. However, I think we're going to have a really interesting guest on tonight in Joe Hickey-Hall, who runs and operates the Modern Day Fairy Sightings podcast that I believe came about in 2020. First-hand sightings of these small, I'm not going to say winged creatures, because I think Joe's going to enlighten us, and I'm all ears. I really want to hear what Joe's got to say. Joe, welcome to Truth Proof.
Hello. Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm really honoured to be here. And yeah, just it's very exciting.
I think so, yeah. And, you know, you can start wherever you want with this, because I think we've all got this take on fairies, should we say, and crazy thing to be talking about, but no more crazy than what we discuss when we talk about cryptids and UFOs, when you give it some serious thought. And when we think about these things, they're depicted in books as small, almost angelic little creatures, almost cartoon-like. What's your take on them? What have you discovered?
Oh, well, I think I've discovered that you can't really pin them down in terms of an image, or or what they are, or who they are. The image that we all know is that image from the fairy books, the Cicely Mary Barker books, the Flower Fairy books, and the old kind of Victorian story books that we had as children, that we all loved the illustrations and everything. And yeah, I mean, on the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast, I speak to people about their experiences, and really, for the most part, they don't sound or look like anything like those images that we're used to seeing, portrayed as fairies. And often they don't behave in the same ways either. So yeah, I agree, that it is a bit of an out there theme for a lot of people, because we're brought up with the idea that they're nonsense, along with Father Christmas and all these other sorts of things that we tell our children as kids that we expect them to grow out of. And so at a certain point, if someone's still talking about fairies, you know, it doesn't compute with most people. But you know, I've had experiences myself, which I'll talk about tonight, and what I really love is talking to people about their experiences, because so the project itself is it's really to kind of allow people a space to tell their experiences in their own words, and it's working just as importantly as a means for other people to hear those experiences and feel that they're not alone, because I can tell you a lot of people have had these experiences.
Yeah.
You will know people that have had these experiences. I mean, you know what it's like, don't you? There's so many people that have had these extraordinary experiences to very ordinary people going about their business, and these amazing things happen, and often they are reluctant to tell their friends and family because they think they're not going to understand.
And your podcast is an outlet for that, isn't it? It's a conduit for people to share those stories, just like UFO podcasts or any other.
Yeah.
I don't want to take you off your train of thought here. So, do you want to tell us any of the experiences that you've personally heard about?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, I guess, you know, like you sort of mentioned UFOs, and I think there's this kind of spectrum. This is something that Mark Norman, my co-author from Magical Folk, we co-authored a chapter in Simon Young's book Magical Folk. So if anyone's interested in reading about these experiences and learning about the folklore as well, that's a really great book. And you know what he would say, and I always describe this, is that there's a spectrum where at one end you've got you know, ghosts, which are a very respectable experience to have nowadays. And well, you know, for a long time, really, the Victorians loved their ghosts, of course. But, you know, of course, it goes back very, very far. But for someone to say they've seen a ghost, that's not too much of a stretch for people to accept, because, you know, we all know that we die. None of us know what happens after that. We're familiar with ideas like, you know, the Holy Spirit, and that somehow we might go on in some form. So we can kind of think, okay, well, you know, maybe there are such things as ghosts, and that's okay. We can get our heads around that. But then sort of further along the spectrum, you'll have things like UFOs. And again, I mean, you know, that's becoming fairly acceptable, really.
Yeah, I agree.
People are interested.
Quite happy to say that they've seen UFOs. So
Yeah.
Where does the fairy come into this down?
Well, this is
the pecking order?
In the pecking order, yeah. I mean, this is beyond the realms for most people, because you can, with UFOs, you can think, okay, I don't know if aliens exist, but or these other places where, you know, other beings can exist, but I can look at the stars, I can see the stars. I know we're not the only planet, of course. I know we're probably not the only planet that life can live on. So again, we can kind of get our heads around that. But when it comes to fairies, if somebody's got to get their head around the fact that there are otherworldly beings that are around us and can pop up, that we might potentially see, or that, you know, that they might be there in some form around us, then we're starting to think, well, where are they? Are they in my garden? Are they watching me? You know, if they do exist, then what does that say about my understanding of this world? It just blows everything out of the water. And so for a lot of people, they just cannot wrap their heads around it. But I mean, like I say, I would hazard a guess that most people out there, even if they've never seen anything like that themselves, someone they know will have done. Yeah. Because it just happens so frequently. And when I speak to people on the podcast, I mean, for instance, the first episode was I was talking to this guy who he I mean, he had a really responsible job. He had a very kind of high profile job, actually, in some respects. If I can't tell you what he did because he, he didn't want me to talk about that. But if I told you what he did, you wouldn't really, you would be hard pushed to question, his honesty. Okay. Because he was, holding a very responsible position. And he had a tricky time in his life, and he'd gone off walking in the Highlands of Scotland. And while he was up there, he went off for a walk one night, went to the pub. And of course, as soon as you say that, people say, oh, right,
Yeah,
okay.
had a drink, yeah.
He had a few beers, and he said he had, was it 1 or 2 pints with a pie? It was no more than 2 pints anyway. He said he had a pie, and he had his 2 pints, which he was used to, he was used to drinking, whatever. And he's walking back from the pub. Now, this is a really isolated place, way up in the Highlands. And he's on his own, and it's just getting to dusk. And as he's walking back, he sees this figure. It had a grey skin. I think from memory, he said it would have come up to about his sort of chest, mid-chest or something. So it wasn't tiny, but it looked like it was. So it wasn't wearing any clothes. It was long and gangly, and it was not human. And as he saw it, it ran. Went across his path. It saw him, and it looked back at him as it ran off. It scarpered. And he said it was like seeing a deer or something. We got the eye contact with this being. And to be honest, that's something that comes up a lot. People talk about the eye contact. That comes up a lot, more than you'd think. So, he couldn't explain it. He was amazed by it. But at the same time, he said it just felt really natural. He said it wasn't, because when you think about these things, you think, oh, well, if somebody told me I was going to see a fairy, if I saw a fairy, you start to imagine that you would react in all these amazing, marvelous ways. Oh, I'd do this and I'd think that, and it would be this wow moment. When in actual fact, when it happens, it's very, very mundane, natural, just kind of feels normal.
Joey's description, I mean, you correct me if I'm wrong, that kind of does not sound like the typical fairy that people, we talked about this at the very sort of start of the show. So what made him think he'd seen a fairy?
Well, I mean, loads of us researchers in this area, we are starting to realize that these otherworldly beings that some people call fairies, some people might call them daemons, some people might suggest that these beings known as Sasquatch or Bigfoot, that they are fairy beings. They are beings from another world that we call fairies. Now, sometimes they do look like the winged Tinkerbells. There have been a couple of guests on the show that have seen small winged humanoids. The one that I saw was a humanoid. It was about 2.5, 3 foot tall. So we'll talk about that afterwards. Yeah. And that they turn up quite frequently. But then there are these other beings. There are the kind of beings that you might describe as werewolves. There are very strange beings that look more like a sort of demon-y type of or daemon type of character. And they're not all light and fluffy either. Some people have had some absolutely terrible, terrible experiences that are terrifying, and that they, quite frankly, don't really ever want to, they find it hard to talk about it.
So would you say then the stories of folklore of the Hobbs and the goblins, we're dealing with the same thing here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does seem like that.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, a lot of the folklore, they are turned into morality tales, and the function of those was, it could be turned to use. Say, for instance, if you have, you know, if you have some land and you have some people working on that land and you want to warn them away from doing certain things, then you might bring in these morality tales, you know, to behave themselves, or else the goblins will get them, or whatever. They'll kind of suffer in some way if they go beyond their station in some way, and these sorts of ideas. That doesn't really tend to reflect the sorts of stories that people actually have. It's quite unusual for, you know, the types of stories that we hear in folklore to actually play out in people's lives. That's not really what I'm seeing. Although there are similarities in terms of how they look. Yeah, I think, you know, it does seem different to the folklore, but then there are lots of similarities. And whenever somebody you know, provides a description of their experience, their encounter, then I do look through the folklore and I'll pick out some similarities with some you know, some stories, some well known, some not so well known. There's a really good, if people are interested in reading about these as well, there's a really good piece of work by Simon Young, Dr. Simon Young, and this is the fairy census. So that was run originally from 2014 to 2017, and there are 500 encounters on there. That's free online. You can go to the Fairy Investigation Society, or you can look up the fairy census and you can read through those. These are first-hand accounts. So often if I'm talking to somebody and they describe what they've seen, I sometimes look through that census as well, and I might pull out a couple. So all that sort of info's on the website.
Does location play an important part?
It can do. I mean, what I would say about location is often for people that have the experiences, they have some kind of relationship with that landscape. Doesn't have to be. But if they have some kind of ongoing relationship with that landscape, there seems to be, it's almost like, even for the guy that was walking up in the Highlands, okay, he's taken himself off. He just needs that time. He's going through a difficult time in his life. His solace was in nature. And it's like that for a lot of people. You know, particularly in lockdown, it was like that for people. If they didn't have their own gardens, they really needed, there was a yearning, wasn't there, to get into nature, even just your local park, or just attend pots on your windowsill, just anything. There was that need. And I think, you know, in times of suffering and just generally as human beings, we need to be close to nature. There's that connection. And you know, with that guy, he's gone off, he's walking, he's appreciating the wildness of that place. And then that happens. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that there is some kind of communion there with a location, with a place. It's almost like
he's in touch with it. He's lost himself within it.
Yeah, well, he is appreciating it and almost kind of becoming part of it. And you can do that through meditation, and I would encourage that if people are interested in doing that. They can just kind of go somewhere and meditate, and I often talk about going to a nice tree somewhere, or by wherever, a little spot where you won't be disturbed, and just you know, you can put your hands on the earth and just concentrate on your breathing and just allow yourself to sort of melt away, just forget about the physical and just kind of go inwards. And if you do that, which sometimes you can do through walking, you know, you get in, it gets quite rhythmic and quite meditative, doesn't it? Especially if you're on your own. You can just start to blend in with the landscape. And that's when I think a lot of these experiences happen. So it can be like that. They can turn up in people's houses though. So, you know, that sometimes happens. Other places.
Obviously you might have an account of that, but just to, you talked about farmers creating stories to sort of warn workers, or sort of keep them on guard or whatever, in the past, about hobs and goblins. Have you heard anything about thought forms and the potential for these things to be created? We know we're creating the folklore, we're creating the story, but do you think sometimes these things could actually be created? No?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard a lot about that idea. I think it potentially could do, because our capacity for manifestation as human beings is limitless, really. So it could be like that. I have to say, though, with one thing that's happened recently has really made me, because I did think before, well, maybe these places, they are what they are is nature beings, and depending on us and what our knowledge and experiences and our ideas of what fairies might be or what nature might be, when we go to a place, we see something through our own perception, through our lens of whatever our perception is of all of that knowledge and experience and ideas. But just recently, I was back in Jersey, because I'm from Jersey, and when I had my fairy experience, the kind of the most amazing one for me, which was kind of the first one, really. At the time, I confided in a friend, and well, perhaps I could tell you what I saw, and that might make more sense, actually. And then
that'd be fabulous. Yeah, love to hear that.
Yeah. So back in 2006, I had it was a really important time for me, really, because I had met the man that was to become my husband, and we'd not long been together. We'd been together about 6 months or so, maybe, perhaps slightly longer. And he'd visited me in Jersey, and we had gone to watch the sun go down. So we'd gone together, and we'd taken a really lovely picnic and everything. And while we were sitting there, so it had got to twilight time, and something made me turn around. And when I did, I came face to face with this little being. He was about 2.5, 3 foot tall. He was green. He was wearing, a little jacket, little waistcoat, little kind of archetypal outfits that you might see in the kind of Brian Froud.
A children's illustrated book, yeah.
Well,
in a children's illustrated book.
Yeah, not kind of winged stuff, but more the sort of, the Brian Froud. So he designed the puppets for Labyrinth, and the goblin, the goblin kind of characters, and that very, close-ish to that. Not as exaggerated features. His face was open and quite roundy, lovely face. He had bright eyes, really bright eyes, and he was staring into my eyes. So we were just looking at each other, regarding each other for I don't know how long, moments. And what I noticed about his face was that the skin was so wrinkled that there was no kind of flat skin. It was just wrinkle upon wrinkle, just so ancient, unbelievably ancient. Every part of his face was covered in these wrinkles. But he had a nice face, and he wasn't smiling, but he wasn't frowning either. He was just looking at me, and it felt like he'd been looking at me before I saw him as well, because he was already looking at me when I saw him. And I can't remember whether he was in front. So there was a fallen log, and I can never remember whether he was in front of it or behind it, but he was next to a fallen log. And I either then blinked or looked away, and he was gone.
Yeah.
But I saw him, and I had my eyes wide open, and it wasn't a dream, and I wasn't drunk, and hadn't been taking drugs or anything like that. And this is the kind of thing you end up saying, isn't it? Because people just find it so much of a stretch, but that happened. So I didn't say anything to my partner at the time. I was still, I guess, figuring out what it was that had just happened. But the impression that I came away with was that he wanted me to see him. And that felt like quite an intuitive thing. I didn't get any, mind-blowing knowledge or anything like that. It was very, very simple, just a meeting. and just this sense that he'd wanted me to see him. That's all. So
did you get a feeling of great intelligence with this thing, or just wisdom?
A really nice connection, actually.
Yeah.
A really lovely connection. And that place is somewhere that I didn't go all the time, but it was somewhere that I liked to go. Yeah, it was a really pleasant experience, but I didn't get any more than that. Just this sense that.
Did you go after then, Joe, hoping that you'd get a repeat performance of this being?
We did end up working with that space, because what happened after that was, after we had our picnic and it got really, really dark, and we then went to walk back to the car. There was no lights or anything like that, because it was just in the middle of nowhere, really. So as we started to walk back, my husband that was in front of me, he was walking, and something in the long grass to the left of us was walking at the same pace, and he got quite spooked about that. So he was like, what is that? And there was nothing there. So then he picked up his pace, and then it picked up its pace, and it was really, you could hear it.
Yeah.
And then he started running, and then I started running as well behind, but I was laughing. I wasn't frightened, but I was laughing because he was really frightened. He was really spooked. I just thought it was so funny, because I knew then what it was, but I still didn't say anything to him. So what I did do was I went to this guy who I knew was working with magic, let's say, and I didn't know him really well, but I knew him, and I'd sort of come to sort of know him as an acquaintance. So I went to him, and I thought, well, if anyone's going to know about this, he will. So I said to him, look, I've seen something. And he said, oh yeah. And I said, this is what I've seen and where. And he said, you're not the only one. So I wasn't the only one to have seen something in that place.
So location.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I then confided in a good friend of mine who, we'd done Tai Chi together, and she was into kind of similar stuff to me, and she was I thought she was, really open-minded. So I confided in her what I'd seen, and she said, oh, I'm really sorry, but I think it's lovely that you think you saw what you saw, but I'm sorry, but I don't believe that's possible. And I said, oh, okay, fair enough. And it was fine, we're good friends. But then when I moved to Bristol, not long after, she called me, and she was really excited, and she said, oh, I need to tell you, I know this woman, and she told me that she'd seen something, and she's seen it in that place that you did. So just recently, when I went back to Jersey, I met with that woman, and I asked her what it was that she'd seen, and she described to me what sounds like exactly the same being. So having thought before, maybe we go to these places and it's all in our minds, all in our imaginations and what we create. Now it feels like, well, actually, maybe this really is external to us, and these are actual beings. And maybe, we don't know, but it's just a thought now that maybe there are certain beings that look after certain locations. So I find that really interesting, and it's something that I want to look into more.
Before we leave that, can you just describe its eyes to us, please? Because I'm just wondering, did you see white, or were they all brown? Or
It's really hard to remember. I know that they were engaging and sparkling. I can't remember whether they were blue or whether they were green, but I'm pretty sure they were either blue or green. I can't remember any more than that. Like, for instance, I can remember he had a hat. I cannot tell you what that hat looked like. I just remember that he had a hat. I remember he was all sorts of shades of green, and I remember, his clothes, and I remember his skin just being so wrinkled, and but I can't remember.
No, it's fine.
His eyes exactly. And I really wish if anyone's listening and they ever have an experience like that, write as much down afterwards as you can, because you think you'll always remember and you don't.
No, you're absolutely spot on. And I spoke to you a few days ago, and it actually sounds a little bit like the being that I was told about near Willie Howe. Very similar in height, skin colour, the wrinkles and the strange clothing. And as you know, well, I'm pretty sure you do, that Willie Howe's got a history of little beings. In ancient times, they were depicted as hobs and goblins with the stories of Willie Howe. But as you've just enlightened us, we're probably dealing with the same thing. So
yeah, and that was. Sorry, I was just going to say that was an ancient burial mound, wasn't it?
That's correct. Yeah. And interestingly, it were opened up in 1800s by a man called Canon Greenwell, and he did a lot of excavations in the area and Danes Dyke. The earthwork, 2.5 mile earthwork. But he did Duggleby Howe. He worked on Spell Howe, where I believe it was Spell Howe, where they found the Falkton drums, which are in the British Museum, one of the most important artifacts in the world, not just in Britain, in the world. I think they're coming in the top 10, and nobody realizes that they're from East Yorkshire, East and North Yorkshire. But what I'm saying is, he did all these burial mounds, Sharp Howe, the Barrow Cemetery, but he spoke of Willie Howe, and he said that he'd never worked on anything like it. The atmosphere that it evoked when they were working on it, everything surrounding Willie Howe. He's written about it as in the most captivating place he'd ever worked in. And he did find things. They didn't find treasure or fairy treasure, as people would imagine, but they did find artifacts and burials. But Willie Howe, interesting place. I'm sure you've probably looked at it in the past, but the farmer's not too bad. If show a bit of respect at land, and you can go and look at it, So.
Right. Well, I mean, I'd actually read about it in your book.
Right. Okay.
That's where I first read about it. So, there's so much in there, and yeah, when I read that, I thought, God, that is, like the kind of being that I saw, and where I saw my being, excuse me, is near a dolmen too. So an ancient burial ground. So these places.
And that thread follows through, Joe, all the way through, with the cryptid sightings that we're getting them around earthworks and burial mounds. And so my question to you, and it's a question I've asked a lot of people and I've put to myself, are the burial mounds there because the people knew the significance of the land, the special qualities, the unusual things it produced, or is there another reason that they're there? Do you know what I'm saying? Did the ancient people place their dead there because of these rare occurrences, the light, smoke? Do you think that?
I do. I think they must be on some kind of vortex. I think that, these lines that go through our land, these meridians, which we have in our bodies, and, we can sort of understand more about that through acupuncture and chakras, etc. It runs through the earth as well. And there must be these vortexes. And, we did have a quick chat the other day, didn't we? Because you came onto the podcast, and we also mentioned about how military bases are on these places as well, in a lot of cases, these sacred sites. So is there something about the power, the vortexes there that, can that energy be harnessed?
Yeah, is it pure coincidence? I mean, like we talked about RAF Staxton Wold being the oldest operational RAF base in the world. And around that area, which is literally a mile from Flixton, where me and Les have been doing some work on Wolflands, but you get UFO sightings, you get strange beings, as you know, because you'd read about in the book, the first book, and the farmers around Staxton Wold, not interested in the light forms. That's just tame. They're really not interested. They're talking about seeing beings.
Yeah.
And just glimpses of legs running past the tractors, seeing like almost apparitions of little beings in the farmyards. And like I say, I did write about this, and you talking about it other day, I'd not forgot about it, but there's that much information, you almost think, gosh, that's like 6 or 8 years ago I spoke to these people and I got this information. But it's there. It's
Yeah.
there, and once again you've got an RAF base there, and but we have to think then before it's at the ice point. It's 500 foot above sea level, which doesn't seem a great deal, but it's the ice point to land in the area. So before that, many years before, it were a Roman hill fort. So
Yeah.
we have to remain level. It might just be because it's a great vantage point, but you've said it, and you've got RAF Fylingdales. It's in the heart of a lot of the things that we're filming in Wolflands. It's there. It's next to Gothland, where they've got the stories of the fantastic, fabulous cryptid hounds. You know, it's all the ingredients are there. You know, and you'll know places close to you, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, I think that there has to be reasons why some of these military bases. Well, RAF Bempton.
Yeah.
That's not on any. It's on a vantage point, as it's on the edge of the North Sea, and it's in a great spot. But there's still lots of unusual things happen around that area.
Yeah.
You know, the base could have just been placed there because it's just a fabulous position to put a radar base. We have to look at it like that as well, don't we? So I don't know whether Les has got any questions, or whether we want to go to. You could tell us about some of the rituals or the fire elementals. There's lots of things I want to ask you.
Well, yeah, I guess. So I did start when I went to this guy and asked him, you know, I went for his advice and said, this is what I've seen, you know, and I kind of half expected him to laugh at me, but of course he didn't, and said instead, oh, well, you're not the only one. We then started working together after some time, got to know each other a bit better, and sort of set up a magic working group, if you like. I won't call us a coven as such, because we didn't, but we were working with, you know, magic rituals with landscape. We would work at dolmens, we would work on the beach, because it's Jersey and you're only have about 20 minutes from the beach, and it's an amazing place to visit. It's covered in these incredible ancient sites, so that, you know, there's lots of places to go and be, and woods and things like that. So we were working one night, and we just had a circle. This was going on maybe a couple of years later then, and I think there was probably about 6 of us in a group at that time, and we just had a candle in the middle, and we were in a circle on the outside, and he would tend to sort of lead the group, and, you know, you're calling the elements in, you're using protection and everything as well, he's calling the elements in. And while we were stood there, and it was very dark, it's nighttime, I see this little, like a creature, come from the edge, come into the center of the circle and start to play with the flame. It was kind of licking the flame of the candle in the middle of the circle. Now, it was probably about this high, and most of it was actually its head, and then it had this tiny, silly little body, looked ridiculous, and its head was sort of flame shaped, I guess. And it looked like, and I can never remember the name of that creature from Charlie Brown, Snoopy. What's that little?
No, I
can never remember the name. The little yellow. Woodstock, something like that. Anyway, yeah, it was. So it reminded me of that, and I did draw that when I got home. I actually did draw that in a book, so I've still got that somewhere. But yeah, it was a sweet little thing, and I don't know what it was. I'm just assuming, I'm calling it a fire elemental because it went in, and the way it fed from the flame.
Who else saw it, Joe?
Sorry?
Who else saw this?
Nobody, actually. That was just me that saw that. Yeah. But another time, there was me and so 2 other guys that saw something. Now, this was even later on. This was probably about, say, 3 or 4 years later after I first started working with them. And this time we were working on a beach, so we'd meet fairly frequently. So it's not like I was having experiences all the time, but I have had quite a number of them over the years. So this time we had come down to the beach, and we would usually have a fire on the beach. So we set up the fire to go, and then it started raining. So we've gone over to the side of the beach, and we're sheltering under some trees that sort of came over onto the beach, standing on rocks under trees. And it's twilight again. And next minute, we all turned round. We saw this being run from the top of the beach to the bottom, and it sloped down towards the sea, not heavily, not severely, but at a slight slope. Now, this being was, it was like it was made, I call it a tree man, but it was like it was made of sticks. His whole body, it had really long, gangly legs and arms. But what was really amazing and crazy was the way that it ran. It had the most ridiculous gait on it as it ran. It was just so bizarre and hilarious. And me and these two guys, we know, did you see that? And we were laughing because it was just so funny. And it just ran down the beach and disappeared.
Do you think you've and the people with you? Do you think you, through the rituals, brought these things in?
Well, we hadn't done the ritual at that point.
Okay.
We hadn't.
Yeah, there must have been something about your thought process and your intent, because I don't mean other people would have been seeing them on a regular basis, but it does seem coincidental that you were there and you've got you know about the existence of these things or similar things, and you get to see them.
Yeah. I mean, it was very rare even for us to have an experience like that.
Yeah.
This was not something that we would expect. And yes, we're working rituals, but it was more of a connection with the landscape. Might have gone there with a purpose if somebody needed some help with something, or but it was always more sort of connecting with the elements. And then as a result of that, on a personal level, maybe something would shift for you. It's a bit like a sort of healing mechanism, really. Or you might have this sense of enlightenment in some way, some kind of situation you had in your life before. Maybe you could kind of, through ritual, you might actually discover your personal strength in that regard and be able to move through a difficult situation. So we weren't going there to summon beings or anything like that. But what was interesting was I spoke to a guy on episode, I think it's episode 5 or 6. It's called Mysterious Illuminations on the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast. And so this guy, now, he told me he'd had some experiences, and you might want to speak to him actually, because he'd seen some lights in his room before the fairy experience. But so he was telling me about the lights in his room experience. And it's probably like with you when you talk to someone, you're not ever quite exactly sure what they're going to tell you, but you're having a chat with them, and then they tell you about other stuff as well. So he said to me that he was with his friend. So to say this was kind of north of England. He was with his friend, and they went to this ancient little bit of woodland just near where he lives. So it was just above where he lives. They went up there, and it's just a normal walk like they might do, just a bit of a catch up at the end of a working day. And it was, getting a bit dark, and they saw these lights coming up through the forest. So it's on a steep slope. Yeah. And they're at the top. They're on like a bit of a promontory bit, and they've sat down. Well, they saw the lights and they thought, oh, it's kids messing about with torches.
And you sit and observe.
Pardon? Sit and observe. Well, then they thought, is it? What is this? So his friend was a bit unsure. He's like, oh, I don't know. And he said, no, come on, it's fine. We're two big strapping lads. We're fine, So they sat down and they observed this, and it came up through the forest. And his friend said, I don't know what that is, but, I think we should get out of here. And his mate was like, no, it's fine. And it was these two lights, and as they came up, they then, whatever it was, because they realized it wasn't kids at this point, went to a clearing where the moonlight was able to shine then on this, whatever the lights were. And it was this being, and he said to me that it was made of sticks, that it had these two lights in its hands, and it was kind of doing something with its hands and moving them around in its palms, and it had really long fingers and hands, and it was rolling these, I guess, orb lights in its hands. Now, he had said they realized it wasn't a torch because it wasn't giving off light, it was self-illuminating.
And yeah, that's interesting. And was it lighting the area around it?
No, it was just like two balls of light.
That's it. Yeah.
Two balls of light. So, but of course now it's stepped into the clearing, and now it's been seen. And his mate just scarpered. He said, "Oh, that's it, I'm off." He legged it. He stayed because he said, "This is incredible. I've never seen anything like this before." Now, at that point, I guess when his mate ran off, this thing then turned around. It must have got spooked, and it started running. Now, in the interview with this guy in Mysterious Illuminations, I'm listening to this and I'm like, this is like what I saw, the way he described it. So I said to him, what did it run like? How did it move? And he described to me that it had this really awkward run. So it sounds very much like the being that I saw in Jersey. So again, these beings, I haven't really heard much about these in folklore, but they're out there.
No, but I haven't, and it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Before we move on, Joe, I think we'll speak to Les and see whether he's got any questions, if that's okay. Les, have you got anything?
Yes, a fantastic show up to now, and thank you very much, Joe, for coming on to the show. We've got some great questions in tonight, but just before that, I think we'll do a little bit of self-promotion for you both. Paul, if you can tell people about the website, which your website is already on the screen.
Oh, great stuff. So it's truthproof.uk.
And tell people what they can do when they get there.
Well, send us your sightings, send us your reports. Information like what Joe's talking about, even if there's anything that I think's relevant, I'd pass it on to Joe anyway. But UFO related, cryptid related, anything unexplained. The books are available, the paperbacks are available through the website. You can't get them on Amazon. They're only available through that website. And Don Lodge regularly updates it with any sighting reports that come on. Anybody wanting to buy the Kindle copies of the books, they're available on Amazon. And once again, read the reviews. Don't just buy a book because I've said it's good. You just read the reviews and make your own mind up. And Joe, over to you. What can people find when they go onto the Modern Fairy Sighting podcast?
I'm just going to say I vouch for your books as well because they're bloody amazing. I'm not allowed to swear, are you?
Oh, you are. That's tamed compared to
okay. They are amazing, and I just there's just so much in them, and really fascinating encounters in there. So scarletofthefae.com. That's my website, and there you'll find links to all the podcasts. My podcasts are on, so again, Modern Fairy Sightings podcast. It's on Apple, it's on Spotify, it's on Google, it's on all the apps. I've also just started doing a few videos. The reason they're not all videos is because I speak to people who remain anonymous, so they can tell me we can have a chat and they tell me their encounters, but we keep the location private, and they don't give me their names. But because I've been speaking to more researchers lately, there's a few videos now on YouTube, so there's YouTube as well. And I'm on Instagram and Twitter at _remain_curious. So remain curious, _remain_curious. I think that's all. I guess I've written a couple of chapters and a couple of books. There's the Woollerton Gnomes, which Simon Young edited recently, with a bunch of us wrote some essays for that. A very interesting event that took place in the late 70s in Nottingham. There's also Magical Folk, as I mentioned before, again edited by Simon Young. And myself and Mark Norman wrote the Devon chapter for that. So hoping to get a bit more writing done, but it's time, isn't it? As you know.
It really is, and I know you've got a busy lifestyle and a young family, so but that time will come. Do you know what I mean?
And can I just add to that a lot of the links we have put in the stream description tonight, Joe, so people, if they go to the description for tonight's show, will see the links that we put in there.
Thank you.
Yeah,
okay, so if it's okay with you two, I will ask some of the questions what have come in tonight. Some great questions, as I said, from our chat. And the first one I've got here is from Cat D66. Has Joe heard of the small winged beings Nadim, excuse my pronunciation, Nadim Nab Lapahouse saw hovering over his daughter when she was dying of a nut allergy?
Aww.
It was a big story on the news, and the story of the allergy, I think they're talking about here. But have you heard that?
Was that?
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, where did that wasn't the one that happened. No, I haven't heard of that. I hadn't heard of that, but sort of high profile nut allergy deaths, which is just horrendous. Is this the one that happened on the plane? I don't know what this event is.
No, but we might get a little bit more information on that. And, it's tragic, but
that's so awful. Yeah, no, I hadn't heard of that. So yeah, I'll pick that up on the comments afterwards and take a look. So thank you.
Yeah, perhaps might want to contact you, Joe, and just give a bit of information about it. Fire away, Les.
Jack S.H. Paul, question for you, Paul. Can you remember the sequence of the photos I took down in the New Forest? Very strange. I
can, Jack. Yes, and this is a good friend of mine, Jack, and his wife Barbara, and they're always walking in the forest. I'll not say where. Jack might want to, or he might be happy to, but he did take some photographs, and you would be interested in these, Joe, because there appears to be a being moving in the sequence of photographs. It's interesting. So yes, I can, Jack. I know we can all talk about, or we can look into brands. We get a lot of cryptid enthusiasts will send me pictures of a bunch of twigs, and there'll be some kind of cryptid hidden within them. But I can probably see 3 or 4. And that's no disrespect to people, but I just think half of it's pareidolia. But there is something moving in Jack's pictures without a doubt. That's what I'm getting at. But a lot of times that we've got pareidolia. But go on.
Okay, yeah, I've got a question from Nickname. I guess this one's for you, Joe. Let's have a look. Are these creatures likened to a Mothman, or are they all small? Is the question.
Yeah, no, they're not all small at all. They're all different sizes. I mean, we can talk in a little bit about sort of werewolf type creatures that have been reported in as well. No, they come in all different sizes and all kinds of forms. The Mothman is a very interesting, bit to look into, because I mean that was a whole round of encounters that happened, and some people say still turning up. So yeah, they just name a form, and it's probably someone's probably seen something like that.
Just before we move on here, Joe, and I don't want to sound controversial here or challenging, but why do you think that the werewolf type creature or the alien being, we'll call it a grey, or the Sasquatch, would be a fairy? Do you know what I'm saying? Because I'm really on board with that. You've seen these things, and other people are seeing them, But it's almost like I've had people from other faiths contact me, and they're telling me everything that we're looking at is the jinn. And no disrespect, I believe these things are there, but you might then say, no, that's the fairy.
Yeah. I think, we perhaps all have our different understandings of them, different perceptions of what different names for them, and that's okay, really. But do you mean why I don't think that if somebody said that they had seen a wolf, that it wasn't a physical beast rather than, I mean, effectively, the reason I'm calling it a fairy is because it's another worldly being.
Right, okay, got it.
So for me, that's enough to call it a fairy.
I think I'm making the mistake here. Genuinely, I think I'm making the mistake because I've got the image of the fairy and it's got wings and it's just flying about, fluttering about, which would imply that these things can shape shift or whatever. But yeah, I'm with you with that. Right, I better go back to Les.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that. Nickname has also followed up with another question, and I know, Joe, you talked about this earlier, about location might be a key to some of these sightings, but Nickname is asking what people are susceptible to these sightings. Do they have special abilities?
I mean, I don't think that has to be the case at all. I mean, there is a potential that maybe some people are more susceptible to these because it seems to run in families, is what I'm noticing, speaking to people. So whether that is because it's a way of being, as in you grow up in a household where people are open-minded and that they allow their children to sort of explore the realms of reality, the sort of limit, the limits and the boundaries and of reality. I think maybe if you were brought up in a household where any ideas of that might be ridiculed, then perhaps you might close that aspect down. I don't know. I've spoken to people where seeing a fairy was literally the last thing on their mind. They're not sort of airy fairy types that go, flouncing about the forest, expecting to see something come out of the greenwood. That's not what they're about. That's not something they were interested in, and yet it happened. So I don't think that it's kind of some sort of special talent. I do believe that we can all see, energy beings. Something that I work with, something that I learned when I was probably about 19 or 20 was how to see auras. Okay, so it's about, and it's very simple. Anybody can see an aura. It's a very, very simple thing to teach people. It's a very simple thing to do and to practice. And once you get your eye in, it's, very straightforward. So I think that if we are constrained or we constrain ourselves in terms of what is possible and we're closed to the potentials of other realities or seeing this reality with a very, very open mind, we can close ourselves down to experiences. And I think the opposite of that, if we are open, then perhaps it is more likely that we will see something or experience something. I think, at the end of the day, if you go to these places, you might not see anything, but most people will say they feel something. They go and they know it's a special place. They know they've stepped into a particular part of that forest that, oh, okay, this feels different. And they might not be able to put their finger on it, but they know, they can sense it. We all have this instinct. So I don't think it's something that is just reserved for certain types of people. I think it's something for everybody. And I do also feel, and I don't know whether you've noticed this, but more reports are coming in now in the last year, of a real uptick in activity that people are noticing, where, in their homes or when they're out. So there's something about this time that we're in at the moment where the veil seems thin.
Mm.
The same as it does.
There's a lot of emotional turmoil, and I'm not saying that the veil is not thin. I think you're right, Joe, but we're all going through a lot of emotional turmoil. I hardly watch any news, and I was watching it tonight, and I found myself going, "Oh no!" And you find yourself worrying about things that you're seeing, and it's at times of emotion, I think, that not necessarily fairies, not necessarily UFOs, but that we are connecting with this unseen, this unknown other. And you're spot on, and we are engaging in a connection with the other side of something. And maybe if you're into spirit, then you perceive that's what you're engaging in. Maybe if you're looking for UFOs, that's what you're perceiving. You're connecting with. Ultimately, I think this great unknown other, we're all sort of, we're touching it in some way or another. We might not even realize we're doing it, but I think you just hit the nail on the head there. Yeah. Sorry, Joe.
Yeah.
Butting in.
No, I agree. It's you know, we don't know what's happening, of course, because we're in the middle of it at the moment. But I think most of us can say we feel that there is something taking place, and you can feel that shift. And you know, for a lot of people, it's a kind of internal thing. What's happening in the world, of course, it's very difficult. And I'm like you, I actually don't watch the news anymore. I used to have the radio on all the time. I used to love listening to Six Music and, you know, Radio 4. I don't listen to it anymore because I don't. Yeah, it's very difficult. You need to be aware of what's going on and send and help as much as you can. But if you're kept in a constant state of anxiety, it's not good for you. It's not good for anybody.
It's bringing the mood down, isn't it? It's a sad state of affairs when I'm sat here and you're doing the same, and I bet there's people listening in chat and afterwards. We don't actually want to hear it. We're almost like ostriches because we're burying our heads in sand, which we shouldn't do. But it's so, a lot of what we're listening to is so depressing and oppressive that it's not good for us
No.
spiritually or just for us our being. And you know, like prime example, as say I hardly watch it, and I just found myself, I went, oh no, you know what I mean? And it just makes you feel down. And
it's hard.
It is hard, but we're not about feeling down, are we? So
No. But just on that, I mean, there's one thing saying sticking your head in the sand. I think another is to know what's going on and send whatever you can and do whatever you can to help, but do not compound, you know, be compounded by this constant stream of, you know, anxiety raising news. It's not good. But so yeah, I mean, I think that people in lockdown, they sought, as I say, they sought solace in nature, but they also went inside. They went, you know, they started to think about, oh, hang on, it reminded you how short life can be and how precious your life is, and therefore what is important to me, who is important to me. Do I really want to be living here? Do I really want to be surrounded? Do I want to be doing this job? Do I want to be doing something else? It made you really stop and take stock. And I think part of that is where if you go inside, you know, you can start some sort of period of enlightenment or evolution within yourself. And a lot of us have done that. We've gone, right, actually, do you know what? I'm not going to do that anymore. I want to do this. This is what I want to do. And they've done it.
Yeah.
So I think that the shift that's taking place, it's taking place within people and in communities where you live, and you know, look for that and get involved in that. And if you're going to form groups to help other places that are going through difficult places, do it in your community, connect with other like-minded people, because you can actually achieve a lot more and feel part of something.
Yeah, you know, agreed. Before we go to the next question, I'm just sort of reading through messages. And
sorry.
No, it's fine. It's great. But thanks for the happy birthday, Sarah RW. Really appreciated. I know what that is. And Les, fire the next question.
Yes, and this juncture, I've got to say thank you to the people who have contributed to the super chat tonight. Thank you, John Bowes and Lee Roscoe. Lee again, thank you very much. And I've got a question there from Space Cadet Lottie, and the question is, what is the most interesting brownie encounter, Joe, can you think of, please?
Right. Well, I think of brownies as kind of being in the home. I tend to think of brownies as being the ones that might help out at home. There's a really interesting one that didn't come through me, but was in a book that was written in the kind of late 80s, maybe early 90s, and it was in Janet Bord's book, I think. Fairies. I think it might be called something like Encounters with Fairies. But so this one was in somebody's home, and so somebody was moving out of a house, and they sold the house, and the incoming family were told, oh, that by the way, there's a fairy there. And the incoming family thought, well, that's a load of nonsense. So remember, this is actually happening in the 1990s. This wasn't an old tale. This was happening in modern times. So the family that moved in, the wife, found that she was having a lot of help with her washing. So she would go off to work, and she would find that her clothes washing was being done for her, and all the rest of it, and maybe things being tidied in the house and all that sort of thing. And at some point, so this carried on for a while, and then at some point the relationship turned sour. Now I think she was getting a bit fed up with the brownie that was obviously being helpful in some way, but I don't know whether they got their wires crossed or something, but the relationship turned sour. And next minute she was coming back, and there were things like jam being rubbed into the carpet. There was washing powder being poured all over the food, and she had a really terrible time of it with this brownie. That's one I always think of with brownies in the home. Maybe that's a bit of a warning story. I did speak to a woman lately who said that she had had a fairy door in her home, and after having lots of knocking going on and tapping, she realized it probably wasn't a good idea to have that in the bedroom, because effectively it was a portal. She hadn't really considered that. She just thought, oh, that's a nice fairy door, put it in the bedroom. So she moved it and put it somewhere more more suitable. But brownie wise, I'm just trying to think of, there was a fairy in the home in one of the early episodes, where a woman came back to find a fairy had flown in the window of her kitchen, and had she realized afterwards through our conversation, while I was asking her questions about it, there was some honey on the windowsill. So we think that it had come in through the window to get the honey. This was in the US, this happened. And it had got itself stuck to the fly paper. So she saw it, and its wing was stuck to the fly paper in the kitchen, and she watched it kind of try and unravel itself off the fly paper, and then it hurtled out of the window and flew away. So I think that's episode 3. It's called The Honey Bandit on the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast. But if I think of any more brownie stories, I'll let you know. It's been quite a few episodes, so it's quite hard to remember actually. I'm sure there must be one.
There's a place, Joe, I know Les wants to do another question, but there's a place called Carnaby, close, 3 or 4 miles away, 3 miles away from where I'm sat now. And they're good friends of mine. I'll not say the names, but Chris Turner and I, we did the documentary Bringing Down the Light. And this guy's got about half an acre of land at the back of his property. And it's beautiful, absolutely lovely garden. Part of it's just let it go to nature. It's lovely. And he's really clever, and he's built he's set stones, a circle of stones in one part of the garden, and segregated it off, and he's built a church door. That's how I describe it, because he's a craftsman. He's a really, really clever man. And when I say a church door, it's about 3 inch thick, and it's made of hardwood, and it's arched, and there's a brick archway into it. And he's with his grandson, holding him in his arms. And this is in the documentary Bringing Down the Light. And he's got a great big door knocker on the door, and he says, "Shall we see if the fairies are in?" and he bangs on the door, and this little winged being comes down. I mean, we've got it on film. They've been kind enough to show us this, and I've no idea what it is. You can almost see knee. Well, you can, not almost. You can see knees. You can see feet. It's a little winged being. It's a little winged being, and you know, me and Chris have spoke to him at length. I mean, I spoke to him last week, actually. They asked me to call round and for a coffee with my wife, and we haven't done, and it's long overdue. But nothing to gain by coming out with this story.
No.
And we both hold really responsible jobs, just like what you're talking about now. And we've got this image in bringing down the light. No, it's not an image. You can see, he's knocked on the door and it comes in. It's just weird. It's a really special bit of footage. So sorry, Les, and I've sort of butted in there on Joe, but let's have another question, please.
Oh, fascinating, and fascinating questions from our guests, from our everybody in the chat tonight. So I'm just going to rearrange wildly a question here because this is it dovetails into the subject we were talking before this one, and it's from Ronald Kinsella. It's a great question. Do you think negativity, especially from the news, is designed to block stroke hide the veil?
Spot on. I think he's right myself, but yeah.
Controversial, but yeah, I think, let's put it this way, the most that you can do to maintain your well-being, the better. I think that personally, for me, that means meditating at least once a day. Be the first thing I do when I wake up. I just put, and I use something called Insight Timer app, which is free. I really highly recommend this to anybody because you've got everything on there. Whatever you're into, it's on there. If you just want a body scan thing or just something to clear your mind in the morning. So start the day well, and then it could just be 5 minutes. That's all I do. I'm lying in bed, I switch it on for 5 minutes, and then I get up. And sometimes when most of the time when I'm going to sleep as well, I listen to something. I do think that, really dreadful news like that, it does have an effect on people. I'd be very surprised if the powers that be did not know that. And what can you say, really? I think, you've got to be in charge of what you actually bring into your being and what you choose to place your focus on. And you can very quickly just become of the mindset that the world is a terrible place, that there's just a million things to be frightened of, there's a million things to be worried about. And actually, if you go out and look around you, what you see is, I here living in Bristol, I just see love everywhere. I know that sounds a bit far-fetched for some people, but actually I go to the supermarket, people are helping each other. I walk down the street, people are strangers chatting to each other. I see people actually helping each other and being there for one another. And that's something that we saw in lockdown as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
You see so many people helping.
Do you think that's because you're quite a positive person?
I'm not always. Well, no, I'm definitely not always positive. I have terrible days like everybody else, and and really grumpy and just feeling really fed up like everybody else does. But what I'm saying is that I recognize when I'm doing something that doesn't make me feel good, and that might be, it might be a job I'm doing, or it might be stuff I'm watching on TV or listening to. You've got to recognize, actually, how good is this for me?
How good is it?
Do I really need
this?
Yeah.
Les, that not.
Yeah, well, yeah. If you want my two penneth worth in there, Ron, then my guess is yes. This is all to distract us, I think, and pushing lots of negativity, trying to push lots of negativity towards us, and we see that with people pitting themselves against other people.
Yeah, that I mean, the polarity and division that is stoked is disgusting, and I think that, you know, we've got to remember the similarities that we have with people and what we have in common, the commonalities as people, and anything else is nonsense, quite frankly. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
Okay, if I can, yeah, thanks for that, Joe. Thanks, Paul.
Have we more questions left? Because I did.
Yeah, can I get some more questions in, and then if you want to move on to another subject with Joe, that's fine. Janice Parry is asking, "Hi Joe, are the beings reported to communicate with real voices or telepathically?"
Mostly telepathically. People tend to hear laughing quite a lot, so they'll hear sort of giggly laughing. With the sort of wolf type beings, there's been growling and snarling. Often it's telepathic, so they will get, you know, a sentence or a word or something like that, and that's what their takeaway will be, or maybe a scene, a view of something, that they'll be perhaps directed to something or somewhere through an image. So that's a, you know, a method of communication. Just trying to think. I mean, a lot of the time in a lot of the folklore, they would speak and say things, but not so much in the encounters that have come to me.
What about physical, the touch? Do we get reports of these things? They can actually feel them, or they touch the individual?
I'm just flitting through my mind of the different episodes. No, not so much. There might be kind of objects that are given. For instance, one of the women that I spoke to, she had gone into a forest. She was at a really, really low point, and she sat under a tree, and I guess she was trying to connect with that tree, and she just poured her heart out. She spoke and said what she'd been going through and was really, you know, pouring her heart out. And when she got up to leave, she saw a twig on the ground with some kind of leaf or something on it, and she felt that was a gift. Now, it wasn't from the tree that she'd just sat underneath. She recognized that it was from a nearby tree. But anyway, she felt that was something she needed to take home. So she did, and she placed it on her dressing table, and she went to bed. And later that night, she looked over and she said she saw a glow, like a little orb, come from glowing from that twig and whatever was on it. I can't remember if it was a certain type of tree and there was maybe its fruit coming off it or flower or something like that, but it was something coming off it. So anyway, this orb then rose into the air. It came over to where she was lying in bed, and she's lying there watching this, and she said it then turned into this little fairy, and it was dressed like the you know, the traditional Welsh outfit with the tall hat, the conical hat, black, and it was a sweet little fairy. And yeah, so she had this experience. So that was something that she had brought in, and maybe telepathically she was being told to bring that home with her, but she had a sense that she should bring that home. So things like that happen. Just trying to think if there's any other object or spoken ones. I'll just have a quick look at my episodes, because it might jog my memory.
That's fine. It's all good.
I'm trying to think on that.
And well, while you're doing that, I'll just make a point of saying that, you know, I do realise that there's quite a lot of questions that some of them might not get asked, and Sky is giving them to Les, and Les will read them out wherever possible. But, you know, we might end up moving on to another section, and there's a few things that I do want to ask Joe. But anything come up, Joe?
Yeah. So this was quite recent. So I had a really great chat with a guy called Paolo Summit, and he had a really great experience. So this was many years ago. He was in his bedroom in a house, and he had not long moved in, and he had rolled up. There was a carpet on the floor, or a rug, or something like that had been there a long time, and he rolled it up and put it to the side of the room. Now that night when he went to bed, he got woken up in the early hours by this little gnome like this at him, waving its finger and having a go at him. But it was in this high-pitched chattering sound that people do they do describe. It's like almost a bit like birds, but not birds. Very high-pitched other language that they cannot understand, but it was definitely getting its point across that it was really cross.
Kind of on fast forward.
Yeah. For rolling back the carpet, and so maybe that was its space in some way. He said he never saw it again, but that's one of the encounters that he described on. That was episode 37 recently. Another one that I would like to tell you about, because I think that you might find this interesting, is one that was called The Tall Folk and the Little People. Now this was just an extravaganza. It's one of my favorite episodes. This is episode 9, and this guy, he was an Australian guy. He had a camper van, and he was camper vanning around Ireland in fairly recent years, maybe sort of 5, 8, 10 years, or maybe 5 to 8 years ago. He was up a mountain where there was a dolmen. There's lots of dolmens in the south of Ireland, and he was up a mountain, visiting those. He said in the day there would be lots of these tourists checking out these ancient sites, but at night time it's very quiet. So he had his camper van there, and he got out one night and he went across to the dolmen, and he was playing his guitar, and he said he had this feeling of something's watching me or whatever, and he looked, and around the perimeter, maybe sort of, I think he said 50 yards away, but in the perimeter of where he was, he saw these tall dark figures emerging, and first they would be at that point of the circle, then they'd be at that point in the circle. He said it was like there was a few of them, but they kept sort of making themselves known at different parts of this, but staying at the same distance.
Yeah.
So he thought, oh, maybe I shouldn't be playing my guitar here. And this was his own songs as well, I should add, that he was playing. He had written these songs himself, and so he was what I would describe that as an offering, actually, because he was given that from his heart. It was something that he'd created himself. So that was, something nice that he was doing, I would say. But anyway, he felt like, oh, this is, maybe I shouldn't be here. I need to leave. So as he started to leave, he got back in his camper van, and just in front of the van, these 3 fairy beings emerged. They were about the same size as the one that I saw, 2.5, 3 foot tall. Again, they were in kind of archetypal dress. I think that there might have been 2 male and a female, but I can't quite remember. But they had their hands raised in the air, and they were dancing around in a circle in front of his van. Now he thought that he had a beautiful wave of, joy and peace and love come over him, and he thought to himself, oh well, maybe that was their dancing as an appreciation for the music, so maybe this is okay. And then they disappeared, but he was really enjoying watching that. But then he had this terrible sense of terror that something was really bad was going on, and he looked in his mirror, in his wing mirror, and he could see behind the van there was this young girl, maybe in her mid-teens, who just looked distraught, but she was not of this world. So he put his brake light on, and she sort of lit up now in the mirror. And he absolutely said the terror was overwhelming. He just started that van and he bombed it down the mountain. He said, and all the way down the mountain, he felt that she was right there next to him. And he was absolutely terrified, never been so frightened in his life. And he said it took a long time for whatever it was to not be there anymore, you know, like 20 minutes or something.
Are they tricksters, or is the two things going on here?
Well, the tall guardians now, in another episode, someone else speaks of those at a dolmen, at a place of standing stones. So these tall guardians seem to pop up every now and again. Again, it's this type of being which I need to learn more about. They're very, very tall. They're about 7-8 foot tall. They're huge. They're dark. Don't seem to be malevolent, but they are certainly, they will get their, he described it as, you know, somebody like a sort of head mastery type vibe. Just watch it, you know, watch it. Do not do anything that's going to annoy us here, or don't cross the line in any way, you know, you're being watched. It's that kind of feeling. The fairy beings, well, I mean, you could have picked that out of a folklore anecdote from the, you know, the 1800s, couldn't you?
Yeah.
You know, ticking everything there, really. And then the woman behind, but you know, thinking about it makes you, if you've seen these dancing fairies, we'll call them fairies, and you've got that peace and joy, you know, what happens next in the folklore? You get taken away to the other world, right? And you never return in the folklore. Okay, so thinking about why did that young woman appear? Well, he said when he got home, months later or whatever, he found out that his family were from around the area. Now he'd gone all over Ireland. He didn't know that at the time, so he did wonder whether this was kind of something ancestral. But now I'm telling you, I'm actually thinking, did that young woman appear to snap him out of something and to get him the hell out of there, because what was going to happen next? Or was it something awful about that had happened in the area, like a ghost? But his reaction was to get out of there as quick as he could.
Get out of the area. I don't know.
Oh,
sorry,
I'm just going to finish that. The brilliant part of this now was that so he didn't go back there for ages, but sometime later, when he'd plucked up the courage to go back there again, he was up there one night. And because that's right, he'd got over himself now, and he thought, you know what, that was an amazing experience. Why did I want to run away? I need to know more about this. So he went back there. It's about, he said it was about 1 a.m, and he's in his camper van. Next minute, there's a knock at the door, and he obviously really, you know, crapped it, because he's thinking, oh my God, what is this? So he goes to the window, and it's this really old woman, an old Irish woman, local from the area, sort of sussing him out to see, you know, what are you doing? What are you up to? And he ends up having a good old chat with her. I mean, this is 1 a.m. And he told her what he had seen, what he'd experienced. And she laughed and she said, oh, yeah, she said, do you think that's bad? Try living here. She said, we're always having to deal with this. It's the tall folk and the little people. That's what she said. So they know, the locals.
It's amazing. And we'll just throw that out, the net out across the board. UFOs, cryptids, the fairy realm. You get 10 reports, I bet there's 100, I bet there's 1,000 out there that won't talk, and probably a lot more exciting and entertaining or interesting than what you're talking about and what I'm talking about. Some of the best cases just go to the grave. Do you know what I mean? And it really is sad, but I think what's good is that you're here. I go on these podcasts, I talk on different shows, and there's an audience. The people are all ears, and through people like yourself, Joe, it's a snowball, and it's just gathering, and you're going to get more and more reports. So I wouldn't be surprised if people want to contact you from listening to Truth Proof. I'm pretty sure they will, and that's the whole aim of it. You're wanting to gather information. I don't know where Les is with questions, because I saw one question come up, and can I ask a question, Les, or have you got one there ready to go? Well, I just saw it and it said, and I think it's miles away. I just glanced at chat and it said, "Don't forget my question." And you might
well, feel free to
you
ask that
might
one
not have
now
an
then.
answer for this, Joe. And I did make a note of it. What does Joe think about the green people of Wolf Pit in Suffolk?
Oh, of Woolpit, yes.
Right.
That
Wolf, yeah.
Woolpit, yeah. Very, very interesting tale, isn't it? And they did seem to be from another world. They said they'd come from somewhere called St. Martin's, hadn't they? And yeah, that is, I mean, that's a very, very old tale, and thank goodness that it was written down. Is it Ralph Cockershaw? I might have got that wrong, but yeah, the fact that it was written down at the time is brilliant. We just don't know, do we? The
No.
sense is that something strange had happened, that they'd been in these dark lands, and it sounded like they'd, come into our world. And of course, the little boy died quite soon. They would only eat food that was green. And then the little girl, apparently, I think she actually ended up marrying one of the locals and, living a fair bit longer. So, yeah, I guess, these tales and these experiences go right back, don't they? And I'd love to know what they thought about that at the time.
Do you think, Joe, that what this old story, this very old account, do you think that we're probably, we know we're not necessarily the green people, but we're just dealing with the same stuff in modern times, just with different terminology?
Yeah, definitely. These experiences have been happening, forever. And maybe at this point, I think what I do find interesting is that a lot of the folklore and the need to collect these tales came up at a time when we were going, through the industrial period and moving away from nature and into cities. And I think that it's interesting that it kind of peaked around then, and that it seems to be peaking around now, because it seems like we're in the midst of this, digital age, which is only going to get, worse or better from whatever perspective you want to take of it. But there's this push for us as beings, our identities and everything, to be online and not physically in this world.
It's taking us away from what I would call the real, the earth and nature.
Yeah,
it really is. Yeah,
it really is. So is that why it's coming up again now? Is it coming from us, like deep within us, that there's a need to reconnect with these beings again? Is it coming from the outside that they're trying to reconnect with us? Don't forget that that you are human beings, you're beings of this earth, and that they are somehow part of this earth in a way that we don't yet understand. That there are other realms to this earth that we just don't know about yet. And is it giving us a poke?
And on that note, I've seen another Paul Gledill's question, Les. Have we got that question? And if we can't get to it, Paul, I do apologise, because
Yeah, well, yeah, a little bit further down the list if you want me to read.
No, I just saw it come up. No, I'm butting in now with questions. Fire away, Les. Let's do questions in order. Otherwise, I'll be told off later.
And definitely will be told off. So, so bear with us, Joe. I have got a question, and the question being this. Right then, I know you touched on this earlier, Joe, to do with locations and things like that. Yorkshire Grey 73 is asking, are many sightings associated with ancient sites, stone circles, for example?
Most definitely. And Paul, you're finding that yourself as well, aren't you? We're all in agreement.
Yeah, without a doubt. There's a connection there. And I always ask the question, which we've done earlier, is the ancient people knew. They had to have known. I only asked the question just to gauge what you thought. But they had to know the significance of these locations, and they treat them with reverence. And that's why they place their dead there, and their standing stones and their ancient monuments. Yeah, without a doubt.
But I mean, you know, I'd say as well, you don't need to go to those places to feel a connection with the other world at all, and these beings, or even just with nature itself. You know, you could be in your garden. You know, that's enough. That is enough. So, but you can do it in your own way. In the first few episodes, and kind of going throughout my podcast as well, I often, you know, remind people or give people tips in ways to connect. But I think beyond, you know, beyond anything, the most important thing is to work with intention. You know, good intention. Of course, work with protection as well, because you don't know what you're dealing with sometimes, right? So, you know, if you go to somewhere and it feels like, oh, no, I'm not sure about this, listen to that, back away, you know, listen to that instinct. But go with, you know, respect, go with good intent, use protection, as in, you know, using a blue light around you, or, you know, white light, or whatever it is you use, maybe a being, a deity that you ask to be with you in these sorts of situations. But you can just go in your own garden or in your own park and find some quiet inner space and just see what comes up, and just trust it. You might think, oh, I'm thinking this, but this is just ridiculous. Don't talk yourself down. Just humor yourself, go with it, flow with it, just see what happens, and do it as much as you can regularly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that, Joe. And I've just got to say, from a technical point of view, we're just losing your picture, Joe, because the room is going really dark. I don't know if you can add any extra light.
Yeah, I can. Just 2 seconds, and I'll just go and turn the light on. Hang on.
I'll put Paul on the picture, and he can sort of.
It's really good. I'm kind of making notes as Joe's talking, and so when people see me lean away, and I'd actually written intent, because I thought, when these questions are over, if we get time tonight, which we might not, I was going to ask if you went into these locations with bad intent, for want of a better word, because Joe said intent, and I'd already written it down. Obviously, we manifest bad experiences from these beings, and I wanted to hear about any that Joe might want to tell us about. I'm happy to stick with questions, providing.
Hopefully that's a bit better.
Yeah, that's good, Joe. I'm happy to stick with questions, Joe, providing you're okay with that. Are you?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
that's all good.
Okay then. Space Cadet Lottie is asking, has Joe ever interviewed Mary Joyce?
No, I haven't. I must write this down.
And Space Cadet Lottie, maybe you want to contact Joe and give her a little bit of insight into Mary Joyce, because I don't know either. You know, I mean, obviously you do, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a question from Bridget Van Bosch. Are the trolls in Norway the same or similar to the Fae folk in the UK?
Well, they all are otherworldly beings, and yeah, the trolls are, you know, from the sorts of fairy beings from Scandinavian countries are very interesting, and yeah, they seem to be very much around. You know, places like Ireland and well, also places like Iceland and Scandinavian countries. Their folklore and belief system are, you know, much more lasting than ours were, and that's sort of down to, we had our religious reformation and we had our industrialization, and that very much cut a lot of the belief system and the folklore. You know, it really cut it back. But places like Ireland and other places in the world, they had industrialization in a different way. They didn't have religious reformation in the same way, and so the folklore and belief systems were much stronger. And I do wonder, and maybe also that these places are, they've often got, you know, huge landscapes that are untouched, and as you know, Paul, this is where we get these beings in a lot of cases. You know, same in Ireland, where it's not been so built up. So yeah, I would say that they seem to be similar. they're just otherworldly beings. Yeah.
Find it interesting the words that you chose there, Joe. The belief system. No disrespect to you there either, but I think we're dealing with more than religion.
Oh yeah, we are. Yeah.
Unexplained phenomena, and
Yeah.
let me try and explain, if I can, not educate people. I'm trying to explain it myself. Obviously, religion does not require proof; it just requires belief. Science requires proof. That's why the two are so diverse. But we're in the middle because I stand by the witnesses that I speak to. 5 books, loads and loads of reports, all singing from a similar hymn sheet, loads of diverse backgrounds and age differences, cultural differences, and the report that they're telling me about their experiences. For them, it's not belief. They've experienced it. They've seen it. So for me, unexplained phenomena sits in the middle of science and belief. You know, no disrespect to people of religion, but that only requires belief. You're talking to people who've seen and experienced. So am I. So, you know, I think that we're dealing with, I don't know, it's a difficult one. It probably needs somebody with a better intellect than me to sort of sort that out, because we constantly get told that, oh, we've no proof of this, we've no proof of that, and all of it's anecdotal. But there's piles and piles of anecdotal, and the people that are reporting it, they're actually on ground zero. They've experienced it. They've seen it up close and personal. I don't want to go too deep into religion. I don't know, I just threw that in anyway. So Les, well, what are your views on that, Joe? Anyway.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think that, you know, if you've had an experience, you know,
Yeah.
and that's the end. You know, you can't, you know, nobody can take that away from you.
No, it's more than an experience, though, isn't it? It's an experience. When you've actually seen something, I can go to the zoo and see a tiger. These people are talking about seeing something.
Yeah.
It's there. So to
Yeah,
me, that's more than an experience. Unless I'm wrong, I don't know. I know I'm going to get corrected by people in chat here, but you know.
No, I mean, what you described there, say for instance, with religion, often with religion, what happens is that you're put off from having that direct experience. You usually have to go through somebody that tells you how to, you know, how to go about this, you know, worshipping in a certain way, and you do it like this, you definitely don't do it like that, and this is here's the person that will tell you, i.e. the priest or the you know, the vicar or whatever, that will kind of lead you through that. The thing is with these kinds of encounters is that you have that direct experience with what I would argue is the divine. I mean, I think that these beings, you are having a direct encounter, a direct communion with something not of the world that we know. It is otherworldly, but if we all come from source, which I believe we do, then they are part of that. And that there's something about those experiences that strips away all the other rubbish. I think when you have one of those experiences, you do change. You know, when that's a big part of my chat with people when I'm speaking to them on the podcast, is that you know, often what happens afterwards is that their life shifts. There's some kind of transition in some way for them, so it does change you. So in that way, of course, it's not just like seeing a deer, although you get that wow moment if you do see a deer, of course. But it's something very, very deep when you have an experience of these kinds, that it's sometimes hard to describe. Actually, you can't quite put into words, but there's a knowingness that cannot be taken away from you. No matter if someone says, "Oh, well, that's a load of rubbish, don't me leave you," fine. That's your view, and I'm not going to bother
challenge it.
you know, because everyone's entitled to their opinion. But fine. But I've got a bunch of people here that I want to actually describe, and we want to share our experience with each other, because in doing that, you know, we're actually learning from that. And yeah, we might not have all the answers, and we might not be able to come up and be able to wave something and say, look, here it is, here's the proof, but that's not what it's about. That's not what we're interested in. We're interested in kind of expanding our awareness of this, of the enlightenment that it can bring you, to share those stories. And it really helps. And it helps because you get these people on the outside who are just, would never ever understand that. And so to be able to share with other people that have had these experiences, you actually feel, that you validated effectively.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Great reply, to be honest. And we're running short of time, I think. So let's a few more questions in. Do you know, Joe, we're going to have you back, because I've been wrecking notes here as you've been every time seeing me right away, and I haven't had a chance to ask anything. So, but I better shut my mouth and let Les get through some of these questions.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. And some great questions in tonight, and the conversation has been excellent. And thank you to you both. Michael Adams, and now I know I'm going way back into the conversation, Joe, here. And the simple question is, did he talk, Joe? And I guess that's the first sighting.
This will be the green man.
No,
the green man.
He didn't talk. No, he didn't. As I say, there was no, didn't hear a voice from him or anything like that. All I got was just that he wanted me to see him. Yeah, that was all really. But it felt like we were checking each other out. He was looking at me and I was looking at him, and we held our gaze, and it was really lovely. But no, there was no talk. And I should say, actually, of just looking through my website there, I remembered about one other encounter where there was not talking but singing, and it's episode 2. And it's this young woman who was walking in, I think it was in Canada. She was off with her dad. Her dad was doing something in the forest, whether it was, anyway, she went off by herself, and this young woman, and she'd been learning cooling, the cattle cooling that they call. So she went off, she thought, well, I'll go and practice my cooling. So she went up onto a ridge, and she was singing and just enjoying being out, in the complete wilderness there, just completely untouched there. And she heard her song, part of it being sung back to her. Now, she said it wasn't an echo because it was a different voice, a different tone. So she thought, oh, what is that then? And there was this thick sort of some thicket down at the bottom of the ridge, and she felt compelled to go down there. So she went down, and then she said she got to the bottom of it and she felt like, oh, I shouldn't be here. She said she had this overwhelming sense, I've got to get out of here. I shouldn't be here. I've overstepped the line. So she bolted back up the ridge, very, very steep ridge. She had to really try hard to get up there. She felt like she would get to the top and turn around and something had chased her up. That was the sense that she got. But she got to the top and there wasn't anything chasing her, and she caught her breath, and then she turned around, and as she did, she saw this little being. She said it had quite sort of dark skin, and it was it was up a tree, so it was sort of the same height as her. She stood on the ridge, and it's up quite a tall tree, and it had its little fingers wrapped around the trunk of the tree, and it was just looking at her. And she described its eyes as being like little almond garnets looking right at her, and then it made a sound like because it was shocked that she had seen it. Yeah, and it disappeared. But that was a really lovely one. So not talking, but a singing and a sound of its voice,
Yeah.
So that might be to whoever asked that question before.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I've just got to say at this stage, I did notice some more super chat coming earlier. I haven't got your name on the screen, unfortunately, but thank you very much. I'm following on with a question from Skyflower. Has Joe's studies gone as far as Africa? Many folktales are still being reported in Zimbabwe and Gambia.
Oh, I would love to be able to delve into that. Yeah, I would really, really love to. a very dear family friend bought me a book of fireside tales when I was a child, and so I read a bit of the folklore, as we was about 8 or 9 or something. But I would love to do that, and no, I haven't. But I would, yeah, that's definitely something that I would look to do. Yeah, I mean, at the moment they tend to be from mostly the UK and the US, some from Canada, a sprinkling from Europe. The wolf, and I was going to say entity. Then we don't know what it was, but it was like a werewolfy type being that was in Spain. There's another one in kind of Eastern Europe. So yeah, dotted around, but none from Africa yet.
No,
None from any
and
countries in
I'm
Africa.
sure
No.
in a future podcast, future live stream, we can hear about these, because I've made notes of
Yeah.
the things that you were going to talk about, and we haven't got time now, but
No.
come on, let's give us some more questions before we run out of time, please.
I'd just say sorry, few in Australia as well. I mustn't miss Australia. Quite a few from Australia, yeah.
Oh, fabulous.
And I think I noticed in the chat we do have an Australian viewer on the stream tonight, so welcome to tonight's show. In fact, welcome everybody to tonight's show,
Great
and I hope you have enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Honestly, it's been really good.
And I hope you've enjoyed it so far. We've got a few more questions to get in, and great question now from Patricia Adams Wright.
Hi, Pat.
Yeah, Joe and Paul, do you think these beings are there to protect these ancient earth?
Possibly. I mean, the tall guardians do seem to have that air about them. That does seem to be their function. I mean, of course, I don't know. I don't have any of the answers.
No, I don't think any of us do, Joe, do we? But I think
no.
Possibly is the question, or
yeah.
were they there before, and is that why we placed our places of reverence in these locations? Hard to say that, but great question. And as Joe says, we don't know. What's your views, Pat? And you tell me, email me, call me. You know, we talk regular, so it's good to know. I'll ask her that.
Well, I've got another follow-on question from Patricia, and it's and I think you touched on this earlier, Joe. When there are multiple sightings, does everyone always see the?
Very good question. Really, really good question. Well, certainly there's quite a few multiple witness sightings that turn up in the podcasts. With the one that I saw, with the 2 other guys in my group, we all saw the same thing. With the guy that saw the being that was rolling the orbs in its hands, they saw the same being. We could say that with the guy who had the experience up the mountain in Ireland and saw, the tall folk and the little people, that's what then the woman, that's what she called, that's why it's called the episode, The Tall Folk and the Little People, because that's what she called them, and they were tall folk and little people. I think on the whole, yes, but what I would say is that when you are having these experiences, you are experiencing it through a perceptual filter. Now, it's a bit like turning into a certain radio channel. So one person might just see light or an orb. Another person might see an outline of a being. Okay. Another person might just see a strike of something, but they couldn't tell you what that was. But what that says to me is that some people are tuned in on a certain channel, if you like, that they see something different to the other person, but they see an essence of something. However that manifests in its form could then potentially depend on the perception of that person. And in that, I'm thinking about auras. So when you're training to see auras, you can see certain colors. Some people will say, yes, I can see that too. And then it did this and it did that. Yep, that's what I saw. Another person will say, oh, but it did that and it was this color. And so, oh yeah, well, I saw that. So it's like we're tuned into different frequencies, if you like. Okay, so it is possible that people could see something but describe it in a different way. I mean, for instance, after all, we all say you've got loads of brothers and sisters and you all grew up in the same family. Each of those children will tell you a different experience that it was to be in that family, because we're all different. We all have our own knowledge and experience. We all perceive things in different ways. So one experience for people can have different layers to it.
Great analogy.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Go on, Les. We've got about 3 minutes
thanks
left.
for that, Joe. Now, I can get this Paul Gledhill question in from
thank you.
from Paul, because it did come in actually earlier on, and it was missed being sent to me. So the question is, fairies and pixies are often portrayed as being naughty and sometimes malicious. Is this borne out in the sightings that you've collated, Joe?
Great question. And hi, Paul, because I'm friends with Paul. I think you are too, aren't you?
I am. I know Paul is a great guy.
So, great question. They definitely, I would say, fairies and pixies can be really cheeky. The experience I had with the one running in the grass, that is classic, cheeky mischief, really, that I would associate with fairies. Now, when I think of beings being more malicious, I'm thinking of goblins. Now, they seem to be an entirely different kettle of fish altogether, although some people have described it's almost like they look like gnomes, but they're much more jagged and pointy and kind of more goblin-y. The gnomes seem to be kind of round-faced and really lovely from what I've experienced. Okay.
Sounds like me.
But the goblins, they can be really scary and horrible.
That's Les.
Yeah. So, but pixies, I mean, you hear about people being pixie led, led astray, and those sorts of incidents can lead people into serious trouble. So, that would be seemingly malicious, although we can't sort of say, we're looking at it from our human world, aren't we? And we're imagining that we're laying our humanness onto these beings, whereas they just are. It's nature, isn't it? It's not like the wind blows your tree over in your garden and that was a malicious act. It just is. So, we're putting our the human framework onto something that we don't understand. But having said that, there are some very awful stories with fairies that sound to me like goblins, and they do look scary and often kind of long nails, sort of wicked faces, crooked teeth. There's a bad energy about them, and you do know, there's no mistaking it.
Joe, I mean,
yeah, I'm sorry.
I don't know whether I think Les want to probably draw this to a close now, but we'd love to have you back on and speak more, because I've got so many questions that I've just not got a chance to ask because of the brilliant questions in chat.
Yeah, great question.
Les and Sky have put through to us. So as far as I'm concerned, it's been a pleasure speaking to you, Joe. Thank you very much. And I'm going to hand it over to Les. Thank you.
Yeah, and likewise from me, Joe. It's been a great show from you both, and thank you both very much.
Oh well, thank you. I've really enjoyed it, and thanks very much to all the brilliant questions. I look forward to reading the chat afterwards, and all the recommendations as well. I really appreciate that. So do contact me if you can contact me through the website scarletofthefey.com, and and thanks very much to Paul for all his amazing work as well. And I'll be releasing your episode soon on the podcast, so look forward to that.
Well, if possible, we'd like to share it on here as well.
Will do. Yeah. Great.
So it just leaves me to wrap the show up, and I know I've enjoyed it, and I know you folks in the chat have enjoyed it as well. And as Paul says, we'll probably ask Joe to come on the show again. So that's great. So I've got to thank everybody who contributed through the super chat. I've got to thank Scarflower for doing the moderating, but most of all, I've got to thank you guys for asking some of the greatest questions we've ever had. And on that note, we'll be on at our normal time hopefully next week, and we'll see you then. Bye.